In the 1960s, Bernardine Dorn was one of the leaders of the violent radical group known as the Weathermen. On December 3rd, 1980, in Chicago, Bernardine Dorn surrendered after 10 years in hiding. With her was another weatherman, Bill Ayers, with whom she had been living. They held a press conference and stated their continued commitment to radical change.
Resistance by every means necessary is happening and will continue to happen within the United States as well as around the world, and I remain committed to the struggle ahead.
The man with Bernardine Dorn, Bill Ayers, was one of the key members of the Weathermen during the 1960s. A man who knew Ayers well during those years was Larry Grathwohl, a former member of the Weather Underground, which had developed close ties with the Cubans.
Well, when the Cubans viewed the revolutionary struggle in the United States, they recognized the fact that the left as it existed in 69 and 70 was not capable of overthrowing the government by itself. Consequently, they had hoped that the group itself would be able to attack the system from within and provide assistance to the international movement, the international communist revolution. As a weatherman, if I became cut off from the main body of the organization, the Weather Underground organization, I could make contact or reestablish contact by going to the Cuban embassy in Mexico or Canada and asking to, as an example, I wanted to get in touch with Bernardine Delgado. That was the code word, Delgado. And I would tell them that I'm Larry Delgado and I can be reached at such and such a phone number or at such and such an address, and the Cubans would make the connection and put me back in contact with the
How do you know this?
I don't
How do you know this information?
Bill Ayers gave me those instructions in, it was either February or March of 1970 in Detroit.
The Cuban DGI is organized into 7 departments and subdivided into geographic sections, the largest one being the United States section. It controls North American operations, including the UN, diplomatic posts, and radical groups. During the 1970s, hundreds of young Americans circumvented U.S. travel regulations to go to Cuba to harvest sugarcane and experience the Cuban Revolution firsthand. As a cover for the recruitment of the Weathermen, the DGI organized the Venceremos Brigades. The organizers, tour guides, and hosts were officers of the DGI who used the occasion to train young American radicals. Cuban intelligence was well prepared for the Venceremos Brigades when they arrived.
Every time that a Venceremos Brigade contingent arrived in Cuba, all the operationals of the DGI had to drop what they were doing and go to work on the Venceremos Brigade. We had to investigate, collect background to see who could be recruited, what information could be obtained.
Do you know of young Americans who were recruited in the brigade to work for the Cuban intelligence who came back to America and were secretly working for the Cubans?
Sí, y están trabajando. Yes, and they are still working.
Still working for the Cubans in America?
Sí, definitivamente. Yes, definitely.
The brigade was established with the sole purpose of providing a cover for the Weathermen to get their people to Cuba for training. And that's why it existed. As a matter of fact, when our people came back off the first Venceremos Brigade in I think it was February of 1970, the criticism that the Cubans had made about the Venceremos Brigade indicated that the majority of people being sent there they felt were useless. They really weren't helping them harvest sugarcane. But that it was justified in the sense that here was a means to train and politicize weathermen contacts and weathermen.
Cuba somehow had the ability to bring out in young people at that time the feeling of communism with a mambo beat, or somehow that what was happening in Cuba was totally different than what was happening anyplace else in the world.
This was the main reason of the interest showed by the Russians in trying to control the DGI, because the Cubans could work far more easily than the Soviets.
Weren't the weather people aware that they were being used by the Soviets in some way?
No, they view the Cubans as being the vanguard of the international communist revolution. Now, the vanguard essentially means that the Cubans are at the very tip of the spear. They're the leadership. The Russians are being used by the Cubans. Now, this is the Weatherman's rationalization of this interaction between the Soviets and the Cubans. The Cubans said, you've got to become active. You've got to start doing things. And planning a national action to protest the beginning of the Chicago 8 trial and to commemorate the riots during the Democratic National Convention of '68, and to protest the war in Vietnam is not action. Action requires that you confront the system violently. So when the Weathermen got back from Cuba, they changed the national action to the Days of Rage.
The Days of Rage in October 1969 was an attack on the city of Chicago and its police department. For 4 days, anti-war protesters, urged on by agitators of the Weathermen, rioted in the streets, engaging in violent confrontations and pitched battles with the police. Quebec during the 1960s was rocked by terrorist bombings and confrontations between the police and French-Canadian separatist demonstrators supporting the FLQ. DGI contacts within revolutionary organizations like the FLQ had built an international terrorist ring.
It was late March or early April of 1970. I was in Buffalo, New York. The FOCO there consisted of 5 people. Bill Ayers and Naomi Jaffe were 2 of those people. Bill and Naomi left and went to Canada. Where at in Canada, I don't know, to meet with members of the Quebec Liberation Front with the objective of establishing closer ties with them and cooperating in actions, if possible, on both sides of the border. And they also received, it was either $2,000 or $3,000 from the Quebec Liberation Front that had been sent from Cuba for the Weathermen.
There was an attempt in 1965 by a group of blacks who had gone to Cuba under my auspices to blow up the Statue of Liberty.
The Black Liberation Front, which had been formed in Cuba in 1964, was the prime mover behind this plot. The bombing was prevented, however, when the police recovered the explosives from their hiding place in the Bronx. Amongst those arrested was Michel Duclos, a member of the French-Canadian separatist organization which provided the explosives to the Cuban-trained extremists. She pleaded guilty to illegally transporting dynamite.
We know that the Weatherman underground organization went to Cuba and utilized the same kinds of techniques that we utilized. These people did engage in direct bombing and killing in the United States. So I fear it.
And yet, most of them haven't been heard from for a long, long time.
That's right, but they're still out there. They're underground. And the question is, over a long period of time, what does it take to activate them?